Welcome to Intended Consequences, the official podcast of the StrategyCorp Institute of Public Policy and Economy. I'm your host, Chris Loretto, and today we are bringing you another special episode as part of StrategyCorp's coverage of the Ontario provincial election. We're covering the entire campaign, analyzing the decisions and strategies of the major parties, and what they can tell us about what will happen on Election Day and beyond. Today, we are fortunate to be joined by some of StrategyCorp's very own public affairs strategists, Kayleigh Vokes, Conservative strategist and StrategyCorp director, and Brian Teefey, Liberal strategist and StrategyCorp vice president. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Chris.
Alrighty, so we're down to the wire. We're recording this with 6 days left in the campaign. The polls seem to be holding steady. I think we've classified this election as a bit of a snooze fest. It continues to be a bit of a snooze fest, at least on the top level. There's been some excitement in the last 2 days, mostly between the Liberal and the NDP campaigns. It's looking like we're going towards a Tory majority. It looks like maybe Mr. Del Duca is at risk of not winning his own seat. Andrea Horwath is coming under fire internally from some in her party who believe she's been lackluster in this campaign. And so we could be looking at an NDP leadership, depending on how things turn out next Thursday. And, you know, I guess maybe a bit surprising. There's some, there is some drama that will probably happen at the local level with some unexpected tough fights for some of the Ford candidates in places like Parry Sound, Muskoka, where the Green Party is a little stronger than it has been in a few years. And of course, the Liberal there had to be taken off the ballot, so there isn't a Liberal candidate. So there's a lot still to unpack, even if it has been a fairly breezy campaign. The polls are showing steady state for the Tories, likely to be returned with a majority. There were 2 leaked memos this week, Brian, one from the Liberals showing that they have a path to hold Ford to a minority. I think it was a play to try to persuade NDP voters to consolidate behind the Liberals. The NDP matched that a couple of days later with their own memo showing a path to not necessarily victory, but to official opposition and holding Ford at bay, and again, trying to consolidate progressive voters under the NDP. This has been all about the fight for second since the beginning. We haven't transitioned to a fight for first. At this point in the campaign, what does success look like for the NDP and the Liberals next Thursday?
Yeah, I think, you know, in our previous podcast, we talked about the progressive primary and who was going to win that and perhaps take on Premier Ford and challenge for the premiership. And we've seen a bit of stagnation there and an extended 12-round fight between the Liberals and the NDP on the progressive side. So, you know, it as you mentioned, the campaign is really a bit confusing coming in after the pandemic. You know, people I think are trying to figure out what is this about, who has my best interests at heart, and who do I want. So, you know, it may be one of those campaigns at election day where the pollsters have to do a bit of postmortem on, you know, did they get it right? We'll see if how the election day polls line up with what we're seeing today. In terms of what the parties have to lose, I think Andrea Horwath, it really, I think, is going to be tough for her to stay on, even if she maintains that official opposition status. I think she'll have a lot of work to do to convince her party that she's the right person to continue that fight into the next mandate and work towards the next election. And you know, after 4 elections, she may look to other avenues to bring her advocacy and an agenda to Ontarians or perhaps Hamiltonians. On Del Duca's side, you know, the benefit with Del Duca is he has a good track record of rebuilding the party after the 2018 defeat. He recruited some good candidates, by and large has run a solid campaign. It's not easy when you don't win your own seat. So if that happens, you know, he'll also have a lot of work to do to refocus the party, bring them together and try and figure out a path forward. I think, if he loses a seat and they're the third party, that's going to be a bit more challenging, obviously. If he's the official opposition, I think there's a really good argument for him to stick around, for him to demonstrate the progress so far, and to show how he can continue to do that going forward in the next mandate.
Just a follow-up question before I turn to Kaylee. How much is this party Del Duca's party? He won the leadership fairly easily. And I'm not saying this to be mean, but it's not like there were many candidates kind of high profile candidates banging down the door to be leader. It's a tough slog being leader of a third party and a party without official party status. But in terms of if Del Duca doesn't lose his seat, how much of the party organization is him that it'll be more media hype than reality on the ground in the Liberal Party? What's your sense there?
I think there's a lot of people that have worked really hard within the party apparatus since Del Duca got elected that are on Team Del Duca. I think you look at the campaign he's run, he's had to introduce himself, and in modern campaigns it is really a lot about the leader. But despite that, I think he's really put a good progressive sort of mark on the party that was maybe a little bit at odds with what people were thinking they were going to get with Del Duca when he won the leadership. You look at the types of candidates he recruited, even the rebranding, it seems more inclusive and perhaps more progressive than the branding under the previous under Premier Wynn's leadership. So I think there's a lot here that Del Duca can get behind, but the Liberals have gotten accustomed to winning, with McGuinty winning three elections in a row. It was the first time in a long time that the Liberals did that. So they're accustomed to winning in Ontario now. And, I think the party will take a long, hard look at what happens after the election. And for Del Duca, the campaign doesn't stop on June 2nd, regardless of the results. He's going to be in a campaigning mode, both with his new caucus, party members, and the public, to sort of assert his role in the next mandate.
Kaylee, if you're in the NDP camp, if you're in the Liberal camp, what is success? If you can't get the top prize, what is success on Thursday, and success enough for the current leaders to perhaps hang on to their jobs?
Yeah, I think Del Duca does need to get a significant number of seats if he wants to stay on, because he's unlikely to win his own seat. And that was a risk that he took. He could have run in Don Valley North, for example, but chose to run in his original riding in Vaughan, which I can appreciate why you do that. But I think it will just set the bar higher for him to stay on. I think to his credit, he has done a lot to kind of reinvigorate Liberals and the Liberal cause and drum up support. And especially considering, this is Andrea Horwath's fourth time around, and you'd think that would be a strong challenge to overcome, but that's not been the case. And he's really been eating into a lot of the NDP support, come out with some strong policies in the platform, and been able to get people excited about that vision. So I think for him, success is getting a fairly significant number of seats, and even if he doesn't win his own seat, I think he could still be successful. For Andrea Horwath, I do think she's just facing a tough cliff, to be honest, because this is 4 times running, a lot of opportunity to hold the government to account, and didn't necessarily do that very effectively. And I think that they'll have a real decision to make after the election. There have been rumblings of folks being upset within the party already, and for that to be coming out during the campaign really shows how strong that kind of current is, because, obviously it'd be better to wait till after to do that. But, we'll really have to see if she's able to hold on to a lot of those seats and hold on to that opposition status. Because if not, I think there'll be a real challenge ahead.
I think her only option was to win government. Otherwise, I think she's toast. The Del Duca thing is a little bit interesting in that there are a lot of parallels to John Tory in 2007 in terms of, I question why you're picking that seat. I get you live there, but that seat isn't a lock. We kind of saw what happened to Tory after 2007. And they're assuming there's a few high profile candidates that if they were to win their seats, I can't see them being there to sit for 4 years in opposition. They may see that as an opportunity to strike. How much of that is a risk, Brian, for Del Duca?
I think you're right. I think it's interesting to look at leaders like Tory and Del Duca and second guess that approach to run in your community. I always think it's important to have someone running, from your community and be invested in that community when you're getting into politics. But when you look at the history of leaders, Jagmeet Singh, Lester B. Pearson as well, other leaders have run in different ridings as leaders and been successful. And they do have that dual role. And it's important to win. I mean, you got to win and you got to show that you're ready to win and make those tough decisions. So, we'll see how many seats the Liberals win. John Tory was able to, work with, although it took him some time, the sitting MPP to try and take that seat over in a by-election. I think there may be options for Del Duca to do that. And I think it'd be smart to consider all of those options when the results are in.
So we talked a lot about the opposition parties. Let's just turn our attention back to the Tories. It isn't over until the proverbial opera singer has sung. What do the Tories, Kaylee, need to do in the next week to keep the pedal to the metal and ensure that they make what the polls seem to be predicting a renewed Tory majority come to fruition?
They just need to hold it together a little bit longer. I think more of the same. They've been very disciplined this campaign. They've come a long way in that regard, and they need to keep giving attention to those ridings that are at risk, particularly for ministers. Like Ajax. Perhaps even in Barrie with the Attorney General seat. So just continuing to kind of make the rounds to those ridings. I think they've got rallies kind of coming up in target areas. So just continuing to not get distracted. You can bet that the opposition's probably held on to perhaps if they have some opposition research that they were planning to use as kind of last-ditch efforts to knock them off their feet. You would expect that to come out because it's kind of now or never, especially with such kind of a long period for advance polls. So they just have to, if something comes out, they just have to have that tight issues management that they've done effectively throughout the campaign, and just hold it steady through to election day.
Is there anything that could happen either from the opposition parties or even things that you're kind of seeing in the environment now that could take the Tories off course at this point?
I don't really think there's anything that they wouldn't be prepared for. There's a lot has happened, and I think even the premier doesn't think things have been perfect, especially through the pandemic. There were some tough decisions to make, but I think that they've got a really strong brand, a really strong message with getting it done. And I think that if he's come this far and the team's come this far with keeping things under wraps, even with some things coming to light and some issues arising. I think that they've done a really good job of keeping everybody on message so that these stories are brief and we move on and pivot right back to the message, which is getting it done.
Brian, is there anything that you're seeing on the ground, though? So, I mean, I think at the top level, it's could look the same in terms of number of seats that the Tories win. So let's talk about specific ridings or specific regions. Where do you see some upsets perhaps happening, and some change in the mix of seats that the Tories may have going into a second government? Do you see any big upsets potentially?
Yeah, I think Kaylee mentioned it earlier, the Parry Sound seat with the Green Party candidate, Mike Richter. I think that's a really interesting race to watch if the Greens can double their seat count from 1 to 2 and hold on Mike Schreiner's seat in Guelph. I think that's going to be important. I think it might it will attest to the fact that Mike Schreiner has done a good job in the campaign. He was at the debates. He's playing a role and really effectively working, I think, with all parties. He's had some cooperation with the government along with the opposition parties in holding the government to account. So I think that's a really interesting seat. Lots of confidence from the Conservative campaign that Mike Ford will win in York South-Weston, which I think is a really interesting example of the Tory approach and what kind of voters they're targeting. That's a seat that Ahmed Hussein won in landslides for the federal Liberals in the last couple of elections, and speaks to that Ford Trudeau voter that makes up a segment of both of their voting coalitions that Horvath and Del Duca haven't been able to sort of break away, which I think is really, really interesting. They've had some municipal endorsements as well in Niagara and Windsor, and there's some, in particular in Windsor area, some incumbents not running. So that's another place where you get that working class pro-worker message of Ford's that could break through and yield some results that I think are interesting politically and perhaps give them some governing direction when they come back to power in terms of holding together that coalition.
You raise an interesting point, Kaylee. I'll go to you on this question. Ford does have the potential to kind of reshape the electoral map. I think as much of as this has been a fairly dry campaign, there's been a lot going on kind of underneath the surface in terms of a shifting electoral landscape. And it looks like the Tories are becoming the party of blue collar, private sector labor anyways. They're competitive in seats like Timmins, Essex. They're competitive in Niagara region seats. Doug Ford last night did a big rally in Hamilton. The party seems to be confident they can pick up some Hamilton seats, and that's Andrea Horvath's backyard. What about the PC approach this time around is making it possible?
They're focused on jobs, and that's top of mind, especially in the post-pandemic recovery. Think about all those areas, Windsor, Niagara, and the cross-border trade up north. The premier's given a lot of attention to the north. He doesn't always get credit for it in the Toronto media, but he's been up there many, many times. They even have a strong partnership with the Indigenous leaders, on working on the Ring of Fire and things like that. So I think a lot of that hard work that's gone on throughout the entire mandate is really starting to pay off. And I think it really is just speaking to jobs. That's why you're getting the support of all those labor unions and things like that, because there's going to be work for them. The government has made strategic investments to make sure there's a steady stream of work. And I think that's where they get that confidence. And these are long-term plans. So I think that it's something that could be the new way for the PCs in Ontario because of these long-term commitments that will have a real impact on the Ontario economy for many years to come.
And in your view, how much of this is a Doug Ford phenomenon? Last night he was quoted as saying, I am Doug Ford, right? When somebody said, what kind of conservative are you? I believe it was. I'm just Doug Ford. How much of it is the Ford phenomenon? How temporal do you think the shift is? Is it just related to Doug and as long as he's along, or do you think it's a more permanent shift in the Tory electoral coalition for future elections?
I think it has the potential to be more permanent, to the extent that things are permanent in this business. But I think that at first, for sure, the circumstances under which Doug Ford became the leader of the PC party were very swift and running into the election, it was definitely an election for change last time around. And so it was a lot of the Ford factor, I would say, and Ford Nation. But, throughout the course of the mandate, I think he's really demonstrated to the more establishment conservatives that there's some real merit to this and that it is aligned with the core principles of the PC party. So I think that it is a lot of small c kind of principles that drive him, even though he's not the most partisan conservative.
Brian, we've talked about this. I think I asked you this question on a previous podcast, but this shift in the electoral coalition obviously eats from the lunch of the Liberals and the NDP. Your view on, is it Ford? Is it temporal? Is it a more permanent shift? And if it's potentially a more permanent shift, what can the Liberals and the NDP do to try to win back some of those folks that have seemed to have shifted to the Tory camp?
Yeah, I think it's I think it really depends on the the leadership of the party, and so as long as you have Ford there and he's governing fairly well, it's going to be there. But if there's the different components of the Progressive Conservative Party, and the next leader may not have those same advantages. They may have different advantages, and I think it's smart to consider that the leader and make sure you're running a campaign that jives with the leader's values and approach to politics. I think the Conservatives would be smart to, I'm looking forward to a campaign or two here, but, continue to try and maintain and strengthen that coalition. I think there's a lot of voters there. I think temporally, when you look at social issues and things like that, there's perhaps more alignment there with the Progressive Conservative Party and some of these voters. So I think that could work. I think on the Liberal and NDP side, it's really about holding the government to account and challenging them on some of the decisions, some of the biases that the government will have from a policy perspective that go against sort of the worker approaches, thinking, childcare. I think there's a good argument there on the progressive side that those two parties could continue to work for. So I think the opposition really needs to do a better job of holding the government to account and criticizing them. The Liberals, they did not have any bench strength this time around to do that. I think the NDP factor was missing, and it was councils and municipalities that perhaps were in some cases the strongest opposition to the Ford government on certain decisions.
Haley, I'm asking you to put your NDP and Liberal hat on. What could they possibly do, or what should they be doing to chip away at that coalition and try to, quite frankly, steal back what some of the traditional support that they've each enjoyed that seems to be shifting to the Tories this time?
I think for the NDP, they need to do some soul searching and kind of get back to their roots. I think they've twisted themselves into a bit of a pretzel, trying to be everything to everyone instead of just focusing on their core. And I think that's maybe led to some of this shedding off of support, because it's like, what do you stand for? Are you trying to compete on the populist side, or are you trying to compete on the economic side? Like it's a bit all over the place. So I think they need to maybe be more consistent. I know it's a delicate balance. You don't want to go too far on that, because you need to have broad appeal. But I do think they've been very inconsistent. And I think that's probably been challenging for the broader public to understand what it is that they're all about, and for their party members and activists, because, that would be frustrating for the lack of consistency. So I think that's what I would do if I was in the NDP position. On the Liberal side, they just need to keep rebuilding. I think, this has been honestly a fairly strategic campaign on their part for doing that, by courting the teachers unions, they are going back to their roots and their strong suits, getting healthcare on side, focusing on parents, things like that. I think that's really good. Obviously, I think, like Brian was saying, trying to be very inclusive, have some good points on the environment and things like that. So I think they'll just need to continue to rebuild and build up that bench strength. I think it has been, what's interesting about this election is that there are so many new candidates. I think that's why we're seeing so much potential for like musical chairs and some strange splits. Brian and I were discussing right off the top, because there's so many new candidates. Even a lot of PC incumbents stepped down, so there are fresh faces there. They're obviously, for the Liberal Party, they had to basically start from scratch, and even the NDP lost some longtime candidates from some strange party infighting and things like that. So I think it'll be interesting for the Liberals if they're able to get some of those higher caliber candidates elected, just really leveraging that strength in opposition to really hold the government to account, and be a serious, very serious opposition to the government.
And Chris, just quickly to reinforce the Liberal bench strength point, from the last election, you had a leader from outside of the caucus. You had a retiring leader sitting as MPP who was, working hard but on her way out. You had, I think, two by-elections, another MPP go federally, unfortunate illness in Thunder Bay with Mike Gravel. You look at the bench strength, and the two MPPs that sat the whole time as a Liberal and are running for re-election is John Fraser in Ottawa and Mitzi Hunter in Scarborough. That's only two people. So, I think when you look back on what Del Duca has done and where he brought the party to, that's a significant push. And, I think with some good MPPs in this legislature, definitely has the opportunity to continue to build and grow that coalition and movement.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what standard he's held to the day after the election. Is it going to be, you failed to become premier, therefore it was all a failure, or actually you've helped us rebuild and it's a two-step process to get back to government? So, well, the Liberal brand's very strong. The Liberals are not used to losing, so there's certainly going to be people who judge him on not having won the brass ring the first time out. But if you look at it, I look at it and say, to be fair to them, I think they've run a pretty decent campaign. I don't think they ever set out to win government. I think they set out to build the party. And I think on election day, that is going to have proven to be fruitful for them. That's just my sense of things. So, let's turn our attention to Thursday. I'm not going to ask you to give specific seat counts. If you do want to, go ahead. But what is the election outcome going to be? And give me what your gut is telling you may be a real surprise on election night. Who wants to go first on this question?
I think that it's going to be a fairly strong PC majority, but I don't think it's going to be crazy, like 80, 85 seats, anything like that. I think it might be low 70s. And I think you're going to see a lot of change. I think you're going to see a lot. I think the PCs will lose some that they've traditionally held and pick up some, as we've discussed, in those areas where they've really got a lot of support from especially blue collar workers. I think that, there could be an upset up in Parry Sound, Muskoka, which would be really interesting. I think that it'll be interesting to watch some of the ministers' seats because some of them really are at risk. So that just means that even with the same number of caucus members elected, the new government's going to look different regardless. You're going to have a much different cabinet. So that for me is what will be really interesting. And we'll just see how much support the NDP kind of sheds to the Liberals. And it'll be interesting to see, how severe that is and how successful Liberals are.
Yeah, thanks, Kaylee. I think you're going to see a razor thin government for the Conservatives. I think there's just too much momentum and resources that's going to make it tough to put a dent in these last few days. So we'll see how that plays out. From the surprise perspective, I think after the election, there's two things. One, look to the things that weren't in the budget, weren't in the platform, weren't talked about during the campaign. Look for surprising things to be in legislation that will continue some discussion around Doug Ford's approach to governing and will create some media buzz and getting those tough decisions that may help facilitate his housing agenda and transit agenda and things like that out of the way early in the mandate, I think could be a priority for the government. And on the opposition side, look for a Liberal rat pack that emerges that really holds the government to account and perhaps causes some challenges for the government over the course of the next mandate.
So you see a reduced Tory majority, though, on election day?
I think a reduced Tory majority, yeah.
And Kaylee, you see about the same level of seats as they won, which, if that were to happen, would be still fairly unprecedented, I think, in recent memory, at least provincially. And I think that would make Corey Teneycke one of the first campaign managers to have helped deliver the same or perhaps even a stronger majority the second time around, again, which is quite interesting. For me, I think the Tories come in about the same number of seats. I think the Liberals form the official opposition in the high 20s. I think the NDP become the third party again. And I think Andrea Horwath resigns on election night. So that would be my read of things. I have no inside knowledge on that last thing, but if I were her and I do come in third, I'm not allowing the party to go through any more hardship than it's going to go through in the next several days, and I resign on the spot and clear the way for a leadership. Well, folks, thanks very much for taking the time to join me today. This was an excellent discussion. Just six sleeps away from knowing what the real outcome is going to be. we'll be coming back after the results are in and do our wrap-up special and talk about what the agenda going forward is going to be for whoever forms the new government. And it's certainly exciting days ahead. So thanks a lot, and we'll speak to you later. Thank you for listening to Intended Consequences, the official podcast of the StrategyCorp Institute of Public Policy and Economy. The views expressed during this podcast are not necessarily the views of StrategyCorp. All rights for this episode are reserved, and the guests on this podcast might be current or past clients of StrategyCorp. To find out more about the Institute and to subscribe to our written material or to find past episodes of the podcast, please visit our website at www.strategycorp.com/institute. Until next time, I'm Chris Loretto.